Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're going to talk about final projects. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week was good. I had two things I wanted to say. One, we've been having this heat wave here, and we normally have a very narrow temperature range throughout the year. It's like 65 all the time.
And that is my operating temperature.
Yes.
And this is way outside of that.
Totally. We were at 75 and I was dying.
I know.
So there's that. And then I also, by the time this airs, probably everyone will have finished making their syllabi, depending on their schedules. But I just finished making my syllabus
Nice.
this week. And that is a weight off my shoulders. Like, you know, there's so many things like final projects that you have to figure out at least a little bit to write the syllabus. And so, check mark, you know?
Yeah, dude, any check mark we can do right now.
Check marks are good.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there might be a little bit more background noise because both of my windows are open because we're having said heat wave, which I know is not actually a heat wave by other people's standards, but for us.
But when you're only acclimated to 65.
I know, it's pushing me over the edge.
We're sensitive over here.
Yeah, we're delicate.
How about your week?
Oh my God, did I have so much trauma this week?
Oh my gosh.
Dude, so, okay, I don't even know how to explain this. I'm really going to try and do it without swearing. But
okay, good. Makes
I
my
was about to
editing
start a
easier.
meeting, and the kids came running into my bedroom saying, Mummy, the cat's brought in a snake. And
Oh my
I
gosh.
lost my mind. I am not big on snakes, and I'm certainly not big on snakes in the living room. And I totally disgraced myself and was not the grown-up at all because I was like, oh my God, a snake. And like, then I closed the door and the youngest was like, what if the snake comes under the door? And I was like, what if the snake comes under the door? And like, I did not handle anything well. So we hid in the bedroom shrieking at the top of my lungs until Eric abandoned his meeting and went and dealt with the snake. So
That sounds like an adventure.
it was definitely, yeah. And I actually ended up in a video to my students just trying to explain that, like, I understand life is happening. I shared the snake story because I was like, life happened very vigorously in our house this week. And yeah. So it was not my finest hour. And it was
Sounds
funny,
like a bonding experience, though.
I know, but I think now the kids are probably going to be scared of snakes just because of my insane reaction. And I was just like, what if Eric wasn't here? Like, would we still be in the bedroom? Like, the snake
I'm
would
sure
now
you'd
own
have-
the house. And, like, we would just be like, oh, well, the house belongs to the snake now.
Oh, we just have to live in the living room and put a bunch of pillows under
And then I was,
the
like,
door.
texting someone and they were like, oh, send me a picture of the snake. And I was like, oh, boy, do you not understand my response if you thought I was going to stand there and take a picture of the snake. But, yeah, because we don't actually have snakes in Ireland.
Oh,
all,
really?
so-
None in Ireland.
No, so one of my friends too, I was texting her and I was like, oh, I've just completely disgraced myself with the kids. She was like, don't feel bad. We're not a snake people. We're just not. And I was like, it's true. We're not a snake people. We don't have.
Yeah.
But Eric was a hero. He just picked it up,
Picked it
took
up.
it outside and then went back to his meeting and explained why it sounded like someone was being murdered in the background of his house. So, yeah. So that doesn't fill me with confidence about how these teaching days are going to go. But, yeah.
But I think that's kind of a nice side of being in everyone's house is we start to lose the formality, you know, and start to see that other people get snakes in their house sometime and, you know, you have to deal with it.
Sometimes your professor will lose her mind live on Zoom. That's what happens. Yeah. But it's just like, as a parent, I feel like your role is always, like, you should underreact and be like, it's
Sure.
fine. And instead, I just, like, ramped it up so much. And so,
Sure.
Yep. I'm going to have to come to terms with snakes. And then everyone's like, but you know it wasn't poisonous. And I was like, there was no thought process. There's no filter that's like, is this snake poison? You know what I mean? It's just like complete meltdown. So anyway, so yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never had a snake in the house. We had a bird came in through the chimney
Oh my
last
God.
year, which
Oh
was
my
very
God.
surprising.
That is surprising.
Yeah. Because we have like a little stove, like a wood stove underneath the chimney, and I kept walking by being like, is there something in the stove? And finally I opened it and
No.
something came flying out at me.
Oh my God. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a hummingbird fly in once, and
Really?
Eric is really good in a crisis now that I'm saying this, but he just kind of grabbed it like
Wow.
gently and cupped it in his hands and took it outside, and I was like,
Wow.
yeah, that is not I'm a good planner at a distance, but in the moment fall apart.
Well,
So,
good balance.
yeah.
Good balance.
Yes. It works out. Okay, so I have a quote this week, and
Great.
I'm actually kind of shocked that we haven't done it before,
Oh, interesting.
because it was like one of the first ones on my list, and then I just kind of, I don't know, skipped over it. So it's Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back,
Ooh.
my favorite of the Star Wars. I was going to do a really negative one from Han Solo, but anyway, I'm going with Yoda because we're not going full negative. And it was do or do not. There is no try. And so I do a lot of hand wringing, and it actually really applies to what we're going to talk about today, where I do a lot of kind of musing about things and chewing them over, and sometimes I just need to get on with it and actually do it. So yes, I'm going to hold that in my head for my Jedi training for this semester and see.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great quote. I am surprised we haven't gotten to that one yet. I'm glad you brought it in.
Yes, and I think Yoda fully qualifies as a professor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so tell me, for final projects, what's been working well for you, or what is going to work?
So, I was thinking about what my goals are for final projects, and I think it comes down to fostering the students delving deeply into some particular topic within the curriculum.
Ooh.
So that deep dive, and also to allow the students to follow their interests within the topic of the class. And so I hope that those things add up to a meaningful, maybe even fun experience for at least some students. And I don't really expect it'll happen for everybody, but sometimes, somebody will really launch onto the final project, and that's just fantastic. So some things that are working with those goals. I always try to give them some kind of choice. I don't try. I do give them some kind of choice.
I like it.
So that's like so one field trip that we do in one of my classes, they go to this local marsh and they sample some water and then they analyze it, and so they get to choose to sample wherever they want to, and they're going to write a report about it. So hopefully they think about it in advance. But even if they don't, it'll be interesting later. So they have choice of where they sample. Sometimes I have them pick a topic from a broad list. If I feel like I need to narrow it down to a list, I give a pretty big list so that they still have some choices. In one project, I've given them the option of picking an element of their choice, any element, And so I hope that with this choice, they're getting a little more ownership of the project. This is something that they chose. Yeah.
Yeah, and then some kind of connection to that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then, so I also, the other thing I do, so I give them some choice, and I put a lot of effort into giving a clear rubric or some other kind of really detailed guidelines so that it's clear what they need to do, to get X grade or whatever.
Yeah.
And so many students go deeper than required, which is what I'm going for, sparking the interest and having them say, oh man, I'm going to take this to the next level. But like I said, I don't expect that everybody is going to feel that way for this particular project. So I want to give a clear path through if they want to just get it done. And hopefully, of course, the students who just want to get that project done will find something else in the class that's inspiring. But I want to give them a path even if they're not super inspired,
Well, and also I think like that structure, though, can let people kind of relax into being more creative and engaged.
Sure.
If they know what the box is, then they can kind of really like get invested in it instead of just kind of like, what's the right thing? And
right. That's a good point. By knowing the criteria, then they can say, oh, I'm going to go further in this direction, and I know that I'm hitting all the criteria, so that's fine or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
That is cool. And so do you have your final projects planned out for this semester's classes?
Good question. Kind of. So normally they do a final project where they pick from a list of topics and they have to analyze something. So that's why I give them a defined list of topics, because they're actually going to analyze it. So I need to make sure that they have, the chemicals they need to analyze it. And then they do a report on that. So in this case, what I want to do is instead have them propose some kind of analysis. And so they're going to still research it, the methods and whatnot, and then talk about the importance of this analysis, but they're not actually going to analyze it because we're virtual. But the perk is that now I don't think they have to pick from a list. I'm going to say, think broad. You can propose to analyze rocks on Mars, like the budget is not an issue here. So I'm hoping that that'll be cool. They can think about what, in the whole field of analyzing things, what would be interesting for them to analyze,
That's cool.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. So I'm excited to see how it goes. And this class, which is quantitative analysis, I often notice that the final project is where a lot of students suddenly become interested who maybe weren't interested before. So that's why I think that's kind of what made me think of giving the ownership and letting them choose can sometimes be really helpful for some students,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is cool. It's cool when you see people kind of blossom.
Yes.
Like, I keep mentioning this on here and I never get the name of it right, but is it like Bloom's taxonomy?
Oh, yes.
About and this isn't though like kind of synthesizing your own thing, like this whole other level.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but it's super interesting how, you can kind of see students almost faced with like what you think is like a harder challenge, but it's like for whatever, it just like ignites them in some way that is way more engaging than whatever homework.
Yeah.
That is cool.
So, that's one of the things that I love about projects in general, I guess, is that it really appeals to some students. And so that's kind of what I feel like that's my broad teaching philosophy, is teach in a variety of ways so that a variety of students benefit. And so the project seems like there's often unexpected students who are suddenly thriving in the project setting,
Right. And then I think also, it does seem like, just this is totally anecdotal, but in physics, there's a real, there can be a situation where people are really good at getting A's in classes, but then go to grad school and when they start doing research are like, no, thank you. Like they do not, that is not what they want to do. And so I guess when you're doing those kind of projects, you're really given that flavor.
That's a good point.
Of research and a different way of engaging with the material.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And like the high exam performers are not necessarily going to be the best researchers, right? And
sure.
Yeah.
And it's good for the high exam performers to experience the research project side before deciding to go to grad school, because maybe they actually want to do something else, or maybe they are really good at that too, but at least they shouldn't have to put their foot in the water, Right.
And like I do think there is a little bit of a thing with grad school at times that if it's like it's just the next step that you're supposed to do. And it isn't always like a fully engaged choice. Like, I love research. I can't wait to do this giant research project. It's sort of like, well, I get good grades, so this is what I should do.
I like school. I'll keep doing school. Totally. That's how I felt. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I didn't really know what I was doing. Yeah.
No, definitely not. But but that's cool. I'm super... You've just invited yourself to get like a whole bunch of texts from me now asking you to guide me through the final project. Because I haven't really been doing them very well. Like I haven't fully embraced the project idea. And I think what I really want to do this semester is I definitely want to reduce the weighting of my exams.
Okay.
And I feel like this is the perfect time to fully engage with the project idea with this virtual teaching. So yeah, I definitely want to engage with that a lot more.
So what's working for you with final projects?
I think the thing that's working for me is mostly I have just 3 examples of cool projects I've heard of other people doing.
Okay, awesome.
That sort of have been really inspiring. And even before COVID business, a few years ago, I was office neighbours with someone called Kim White, who's in our department. And she would do a project with her students during this semester where they would just make some kind of creative art.
Oh, yes, I saw
the class material. Oh my God, like our corridor was just phenomenal. And she had like someone had made a board game of glycosis, like for Candyland, and other people like, had made like 3-dimensional molecules of DNA, and someone had done cross stitch, and it was just amazing. And someone did a music video.
Oh, I saw that one. That one was awesome.
It was super amazing.
How awesome, how creative and open that seemed to be.
Right. And like, I feel like when I'm being so negative, when I first hear about something like that, I'm like, well, aren't students just going to be lazy and not do anything? But they like, some of them like stay up all night making this thing because they're just so ignited by this. And that's
Totally.
super cool. So I felt really inspired. That sort of like planted some seeds a few years ago.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and then this semester, I heard Josh Smith, also in chemistry, he had his final, I think it was OChem, organic chemistry, and he had his final, and it was something similar where like do some creative piece. And I think people did like one scene plays and like
Wow.
all sorts of stuff. And like, so that's super, like just so inspiring and exciting and definitely, but yeah, okay, I'm going to come to that in my working on.
Okay.
And then the other one was at the AAPT. I saw a talk by Stephanie Bailey, who's at Chapman University.
Okay.
And this was a really involved project where she connected students. Like the class she was teaching was really a lot for pre-med students. And she connected students with senior citizens in the
Interesting.
local senior citizen home, and then scheduled them Zoom appointments, and they would meet with the senior citizen and discuss these sort of talking points like how does physics relate to COVID, or like please explain the concept of kinetic energy or potential energy. And
How
it was,
awesome.
I know, it was mind blowing. And it was like this community engagement, and then they had to write this sort of essay type analysis of the whole experience for them. And so that was just like so inspirational and inspiring, and
Wow.
also made me want to lay down and have a nap because I don't know how you would organize all
Yeah.
those things. But it was really cool, and probably so much more like the kind of drawing of like, oh yes, you're a pre-med student, so why should you care about doing physics, like actually cementing that idea and getting
Right.
someone to think about why that is important. And huge, probably way
Huge.
more beneficial than some random four exam questions, you know.
And on top of all the many myriad of awesome aspects of this, one of them is describing the concepts of kinetic energy or whatever to somebody else is huge for learning it yourself. So
Oh
that's
God, yeah.
that's gigantic.
As we found out when we started teaching, and
Exactly.
I thought I knew things, and then you're like, oh wait, I don't know it that well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then the
So
community engagement, it just sounds wonderful.
yeah, it sounded so cool, and then just the idea of like, I don't know, because I think that's something we don't really do very well in physics is the concept of what's your societal responsibility,
Right. Sure.
you know, as a scientist. And I think it's a little bit of an issue. I've seen some really interesting talks about how, you know, there is like a chemist career, like that is a
Oh,
person,
sure.
but then there isn't necessarily with physics, and that can be kind of off-putting for people when they're kind of like, sure, you can do it, but what are you going to do with that degree? You know, it's not immediately clear. So I think we could do a better job with that, and like, you know, societal engagement and being able to talk to normal people about what it is that you're doing
Totally. That
is
sounds
super cool.
really phenomenal. I'm
Yeah,
so excited to
super
hear
cool.
about that.
I know. I was super excited and then also immediately ashamed because I'm not sure I would do the workload for that.
Totally.
But yeah, super cool. So
Well, we can all
yeah,
only
and
pick so many things to do, but if you wanted to pick that, or I wanted to pick that, or anyone wanted to pick that, of course, we could make it happen, I'm sure.
oh, totally. And I think, you know, I don't know if I've talked about this on here, but there was an article in the Physics Teacher magazine that was about someone replaced lab reports with writing letters.
Oh, yes. I remember
Yeah,
this
and
idea. How was it again?
you wrote letters to someone about the lab you just did, and whoever it was, you had to kind of be clear, like, I am writing to my sister who's in second grade, or I'm writing to my grandmother, and it had to be kind of pitched appropriately for that, you know. And that was so interesting to me, and I don't know that we talk about it enough.
Yeah.
The idea of like communication in physics is not just being as fancy and obscure as you could possibly
Right.
be. You know, like
Right.
it's actually like you should pitch it to certain levels, and you should be able to explain the concept of energy without using calculus, you know,
Right.
if to like a 5-year-old and that kind of thing.
And
So
that's such a good point because we are stressing using the appropriate terminology accurately and sounding like a scientist, which is, of course, very important when you're communicating with other people in your little clique of discipline. But yeah, of course, it's incredibly important, probably more important, to be able to talk to people who aren't in your little clique of discipline.
and I don't know that that's a skill I really have, because when I hear people doing it, like any kids science presenters, and when they're talking and you're like, that is such a great way to phrase that. Like, 'cause it's really, it is hard almost when you know. I can remember being in college and my foster sister was having a homework problem, and I couldn't remember how to do this thing without knowing that trigonometry was a thing.
I
But she was
see.
like pre-trigonometry, but I was like, I can't remember
Yeah.
the way that you do. You know what I mean? And that kind of thing, that once you know something, it's hard to unknow it and
Yeah.
remember what
Yeah.
it was like to not know it. So, yeah.
Yeah. These particular obscure words make so much sense to you that seems like you should be able to use them. But why would anyone else know those obscure words?
No, and somewhere I worked a long time ago, but someone would just teach this physics class with calculus, even though it wasn't. It was like algebra based.
Okay.
But they, like, whatever. It's certainly not. That was not a good plan, and it was not good for the students. But they were just like, "This is how I know it, so this is how I teach it." And not this person's finest hour. Anywho, but so what about you? What are you working on?
So I'm working on how to support the students in connecting them with the resources they need for their final project, in particular after I've allowed them to choose a topic of their choice. And so some little backstory here. One of my favorite projects that I ever did in undergrad was with my undergrad inorganic chemistry professor, Rachel Austin. And she had us do a project where we picked an element, any element. I mean, it probably had to be an inorganic element, but otherwise, it was wide open, and we would write a paper on some aspect of its inorganic chemistry. And so, yeah, very open. Pick the element. There's tons of aspects of its chemistry. Pick one of them and write about that. And she was available to help us, go in a good direction. And at one point, I went to her office. We did this a couple times throughout the semester, so I guess it wasn't a final project. But I went and said, hey, I'm interested in molybdenum. Do you have any tips of what would be a cool story about molybdenum? And she lent me a book that had a cool story about molybdenum. So I really just thought I really enjoyed that project and got a lot out of it. So last year I taught an Earth Systems chemistry class, and I incorporated a similar thing. I almost said I tried to incorporate, but I actually did incorporate. So I had them pick an element of their choice and write something about how it cycles through the Earth. And I, had some guidelines like you got to include at least some aspect of natural cycling. It can't all be anthropogenic or something, a few guidelines like that. But for the most part, it was very open. They got to choose an element and choose some area of its cycling in the Earth to talk about. So for the most part, I really liked that. But the thing that I'm working on with that is that some students did have trouble finding articles on their chosen element. And there is information about all the elements, but of course there's more information about some than others. And for some elements that we don't have that much information, at least that they could find easily. So I offered to help, and I did help some students find the articles. But yeah, some students had projects that were a little sparse, and it was mostly for lack of being able to find the information. And I didn't really mean for finding the information to be the big challenge,
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just interested in thinking more about how to support them in finding the information that they're looking for without, directing them too much, And if they ask me, hey, I'm interested in gold and I'm interested in the lithosphere, and, then I'd be delighted to find papers on gold and the lithosphere and send them to them. But I don't want that to be like a requirement,
Yeah. I'm having an idea.
Yeah, what's your idea?
My idea is, I'm wondering, could you do a mini pre-assignment?
Okay.
Which is like, pick your element and then find 4 papers about it.
Ooh.
And then if you can't, then maybe that's
a great idea.
Because like you could even be like, you have to balance the interestingness with the actual accessibility of information.
And then at that point, if they're having trouble, I can help them, because I would
Right.
know in advance that they need help, and they know in advance, they don't necessarily need help, but I could potentially provide a helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I wonder then, could that be, because Lord knows I have done that. Have you, like, where you bring yourself down an alleyway, you're like, this project's going to be so cool. And then you're like, this was a terrible mistake and I shouldn't have picked this bit.
Totally.
So, like, it would be great. I wish somebody had intervened with me sometimes and
Yeah.
been like, no, this is a
definitely-
very cool, obscure thing, but it's not going to be easy to write
Totally.
about.
I'm having very distinct memories of the night before a presentation was due. My friend and I being like, we need to change our topic. This is not working.
I know. Or every person like a third of the way through their PhD being like, this was a terrible mistake.
Did we go in a good direction? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I think that might be the solution, is just have a moment where you have looked for articles and now are aware if you want to ask me for more direction on how to find articles, I can help you.
Yeah, I wondered. That's cool, though. That's so cool. You said so many words that I'm like super excited about. I don't know what they are, but I'm like, there's super, elements on the earth. Cool stuff.
Cool stuff. Yeah, I'm into element cycling in the earth.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you working on for final projects?
Okay, here are some of my issues.
Okay.
Some of the plural. So grading, I find it really scary. And I mean, there is one thing that is great about physics is, I mean, I say there's a right and a wrong answer, and obviously there's huge partial credit and you can fine grain your grading based on that. But grading and essay type stuff terrifies me. I have no idea how people do that.
Yeah.
And so even with lab reports, like I'm looking for very concrete things, and either they're there or they're not, and I'm not grading on like, sentence structure or something. So that freaks me out. And so I think even when I was talking to Josh and he was talking about this super cool project, and I'm like, oh my God, but how do you grade a 1-act play against like, you know what I mean? Like, why?
Yeah.
So that, and I think just maybe getting a bit more examples of other people's rubrics would be helpful.
Yes, I think that makes sense. Yeah. And if you give them the rubric or the guidelines that are similar to a rubric in advance, then you and they are on the same page about the 5 things that need to be incorporated.
Yeah. And then the other thing too, like it kind of feels personal. So like, there is a little bit more, and I'm thinking about those kind of projects in particular where people are really putting in, their personal talents and creativity. And so then I can't imagine being like, well, your colors are kind of rubbish, I'm not giving you full, or whatever it is. So like,
I don't like your color palette for the
it just feels like a little, or like your sketching could use some work or whatever. So that just feels like that's kind of weird. So I think so that's a little bit stresses me out. The other thing is buy-in from people.
Okay.
And not kind of, and I guess this is just me being a baby as usual, that like I want everybody to like everything. And like I was reading through some old evals, which was horrible, but it was for the tenure file.
Gotta be done.
I know, it's so bad though. But I did this one semester or a couple of semesters where I had them do lab videos for lab reports. And some of them were so hilarious and so amazing and wonderful, but it was amazing reading the evals because some people were like, I love them so much, it was so creative and fun, and other people were like, this was the stupidest thing anyone's ever had me do. And so I think I just need to be a grown-up about snakes, and that not everyone is going to like what I'm doing. But so that, and then here's my other issue is sometimes the timing. Because so say, and like I haven't done any super creative projects, but one thing I had them do was like pick their favorite lab and write a really detailed lab report.
Okay.
With like a bit of background, like the pendulum was first used to study physics in blah, 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 like whatever it was. And I kind of found I did that as a final thing. And I always wondered, the quality was pretty bad, honestly. And it was because everybody was melting down and doing 9,000 final projects and other things. So I wondered about timing. Like, if I'm going to do some kind of project like that, should it be a little bit earlier when people maybe have a bit more energy?
Totally.
And so that was,
One thing I've thought about, I like to have, not that I always do this, but one thing that I found effective for that is to have 2 versions of the assignment that's very similar. Like, we're going to write one formal report mid, one formal report late, or something like that. I guess, it's very helpful to take into account when everyone else is doing final projects. But having 2 of them, I think, allows them to say, oh, this is what I need to do.
Right, and then they've done that work, so they know this. I'm not going to start this 2 hours before. And like even figuring out the structure and everything, they've kind of laid all that groundwork. I like that a lot.
And they can improve upon whatever they needed to improve upon from the first time.
Yeah, I like that. That's super cool.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, right at the end of the semester, sometimes is the worst time, it seems like, for them to be able to do anything because they're doing everything right
I
then.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I think I would need to actually, because when I'm hearing about these kind of creative projects, I'm like, that's so cool. But I think I need to actually think about like, what is the actual learning objective I want them
Yes.
to get? And so, but it would feel, I don't know. It's just, yeah. So I think I need to work on that and like think about the actual rubric. Like, what would I want them to get out of it?
I think that might also help with buy-in. If
Yeah. Because
you
if
know
you,
exactly why you're assigning it and can even tell them explicitly, this is why I think this is important enough that I have structured the class to include it.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's a way.
Okay. Yes, that is very true.
Yeah. The other
As
thought I
Brene
have.
Brown,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, well, Brene Brown's always saying like you can't kind of give your children stuff that you don't have. So if I'm kind of
Mm,
wishy-washy about like, well, let's do this project, I don't know why, like that's not going
that's
to
a
be
good
great for
point.
buy-in. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And even if you don't have an explicit conversation, which I sometimes like to do, but maybe not all the time. Anyway, if you don't do an explicit conversation, but you still know really clearly why it might come
yeah.
through. Yeah.
You know, I don't know why this is reminding me of this, but you will know about it because you're an author. But like sometimes I hear about like authors had this whole backstory for their characters, even if it never
Oh,
comes up.
yes.
But it's like the authenticity of knowing, oh no, when he was 5, like he,
Yeah.
fell off a bus or whatever it is. But like
Which helps make the
having all that.
person be a real character, just like you don't
Hmm.
know everyone's backstory that you meet on the street, but they seem like full people. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And then I just
Okay.
had one more thought about your
Oh
thoughts,
yeah.
which was about grading. And I was wondering, for some assignments, it seems to me like it would be okay if many people got full marks. You know, you did the
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
you met whatever the criteria were, especially for a creative project, you know?
Totally. Totally. And I think, yeah, I think that's just that kind of like negative sort of mindset about like catching people out or something. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, and it's like ridiculous. Like, yeah, if you're going to assume everybody who does a solid effort, will get, yeah, that's a way better way of
That
thinking of it.
it could work at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. That's a lot of food for thought.
So much food for thought. So many
Yeah.
thoughts. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.